Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the TSDSI Tech Deep Dive 2020 Session 5. This session is titled as Security, a Trust Perspective. I welcome my co-panelists in this very important session. The session is divided into two parts, as Ms. Bindu was informing. In the first part, we'll have three keynote addresses on the security-related topics. And then in the second part, we shall have discussion on the operator trust-enabled security framework, wherein we'll be joined by two more panelists. As all of you know, that the world is poised to grow rapidly on the back of technology disruptions like 5G, quantum computing, AI, ML, AR, VR, distributed ledgers, edge and cloud computing, IoT, et al. The smart cities and Industry 4.0 ecosystem of devices and services is very large and diverse. 5G and IoT services are characterized by distributed and diverse devices and applications. Technological developments and growth in computing power is leading to increased cybersecurity threat surfaces and threat vectors. And then under this backdrop, individuals, industry, and governments require improved security and protection. This session has international and national experts in telecom and security who will explore the subjects of quantum key, 5G securities, secure elements, and bootstrapping frameworks to address the requirements of national trust in security. As I said, there are three keynote speakers. I will first invite Dr. Myoung Lee, who will be speaking on the subject of quantum security. If I may introduce Dr. Lee, he is the leader in Department of Computer Sciences, Liverpool John Moores University, as also adjunct professor at KAIST Institute for IT Convergence, Daejeon, Republic of Korea. Dr. Lee has been actively participating in standardization meetings, including ITUT, Study Group 13 and Study Group 20, IETF, and 1M2M. He is currently serving as a working party chair and the rapporteur of question 16, Study Group 13, and question 4 of Study Group 20 in ITUT. He chairs the ITUT focus group on data processing and management to support IoT and smart cities and communities. He has contributed more than 400 proposals for his standards and published more than 160 papers in academic journals and conferences. He received several Best Paper awards in international and domestic conferences. He's a senior member of IEEE. So with this introduction, I welcome Dr. Lee to kindly start his presentation.
Thank you so much for inviting me as a speaker here. I would like to introduce my presentation topics. So my topic is quantum security. So recently there are lots of demand to consider various kind of emerging technologies like quantum. Regarding security point of view, quantum key distribution, this topic is really a hot topic. So in this regard, I would like to introduce various kind of technical aspect regarding this one, particularly from standardization point of view. So I would like to start first for introduction to quantum key distribution. And then I will show you several ongoing activities in various related standardization bodies on this topic, particularly at ISG QKD and ISO IEC-JTC1. And more specifically, I would like to introduce detailed activities in ITUT. And then finally, I would like to come up with future plan and the conclusion. As you know, the quantum is really an important topic for the future, especially for computing point of view. Instead of a very well-known bit such as 0, 1, quantum computing basically consider quantum bit. This one is a qubit. So computational speed point of view, it's really dramatically improved the performance. So in this regard, many global vendors, such as IBM and others, they already developed various kind of preliminary solutions for quantum computing. Particularly, security point of view, quantum safe cryptography. This area is really important for security reasons. There are various kind of available solutions. So one of them is quantum key distribution. So I would like to mention this one, QKD. Actually, there are lots of candidate technologies for quantum. As you can see in here, quantum technologies, various kind of technologies, some case networks, some case device and materials, some case particular softwares. Of course, there are lots of solutions for hardware, including computing devices. So among them, I would like to mainly cover quantum key aspect. So as you can see in here, quantum key distribution. So the key is very important for a security reason. So in this regard, quantum computing area, many researchers, they developed how to generate secure key between send and the receiver. The issue is, after creating quantum key, how we securely deliver these keys are really fundamental aspects. In this regard, there were certain activities to develop related standard, firstly from ETC. So at the time, as you can see in this diagram, they first started to consider very basic configuration between only two nodes. So there are two QKD modules, and then generate a key, and then via encrypt and decryptor, we considered how we securely encrypt the main contents and then decrypt to get the original contents like this. Of course, in the link here, there are lots of interesting points for security reasons. So that was really a starting point to consider security in the quantum technical area. After developing this kind of basic concept, we started to expand these technologies for supporting various kind of networks. So that's the reason why I mentioned it here. Instead of a system-wide approach with a simple configuration like this, in the later, eventually, we are considering quite a large number of nodes which are interconnected. Then instead of a system, we can think about QKD networks. So in that case, it's really complicated situations. It's not just a point-to-point. So it's really important to deliver certain information in a long distance way. So in that case, very fundamental issues was how to minimize certain particular delay issues, some case signal issues. We need amplifiers, various kind of optical devices. But fundamentally, how we relay the key in order to deliver successfully to the destination. So that kind of observations, many people from different countries, they have developed various kind of solutions. So currently, these solutions are available. It's not commercialized way. It's in a laboratory level. Some case pilot test bed are available. So as you can see here, Japan, there is a Tokyo QKD, and Spain, UK, in Europe. Also, there are several ongoing activities to develop QKD network solutions. Quite similarly, in the Canada, also there are relevant activities to develop QKD networks. So basically, for considering QKD networks, there are many considerations, such as how to supply key, how to store key, and how to transport key. These kind of fundamental questions should be addressed. And then network's point of view, also very interesting point is how we control networks and how we configure network, and then in an efficient way and in a reliable way, how we deliver original data. That kind of concerns were made when they developed this kind of solutions for QKD networks. Actually here, China, also there are lots of ongoing activities. As far as I know, some companies already developed sort of products. Actually in EU, Switzerland, QKD related products also commercialized. So that kind of situations, I believe it's really good time to consider international standardization. So in this regard, long time ago, actually here mentioned 2010, really exactly 10 years before, at ISG, ISG stand for Industry Specification Group. This group started to develop related standards on quantum key distribution. At that time, it's not exactly QKD networks, but beginning stage, they concentrate on QKD, quantum key distribution. So you can see various kind of available document as a standard. For example, in the here, quantum safe cryptography and security. This is really fundamental aspect for QKD. And then this group also currently developing various kind of document. Now they are also considering network aspect. So that's the reason why they are currently developing network architectures and the various kind of protocols, including interfaces, and then various kind of solutions, some case implementation and some other update of our already published document. So that kind of manner currently at they have developed very useful document on QKD and lesson 3 QKD networks. Another group, ISO IEC, there is a joint group JTC1. There is one specific group SC27. This group in charge of information security, cyber security, and privacy protection. So they are currently developing various kind of solutions, particularly evaluation and some case protection point of view. So these kind of document are also developing. So based on this kind of ongoing activities, a couple of years before, as I remember, 2018 or 2017 at that time, there was strong demand to initiate relevant work for developing QKD-related standards. So in this regard, study group 13, this group is in charge of future networks. They firstly started to develop QKD network recommendations. So at the time, we mainly focus on network aspect of quantum key distribution. And then recently we successfully developed core recommendations on functional architecture, key management, and control and management specifications. Furthermore, recently, study group 13 is also developing QKD-related standards. I will show you more details of the list of documents. Actually, ITOT, there is another group which is study group 17 on security. It's more dedicated for security matters and detailed solutions for security. So they are developing various kinds of solutions, such as the security aspect of QKD networks and the security threat and requirement based on ITOT study group 13's recommendations. Actually, quantum key distribution, this one basically considering optical networking solutions. It is kind of feasible technologies for deliver optical signals. In this regard, I believe study group 15, they are targeting transport and access networking technologies. Even though there is no relevant work items at this stage, they probably will start relevant work for developing core standard related to transport area. So here's the detailed histories of our activities, particularly in ITOT study group 13. From July 2018, firstly initiated the document QKDM framework. Actually, eventually this document was published last year as an overview document. So document name number is Y.3800. After developing this document, this year, we also published several documents such as requirements, and then architecture, and then key management, control and management, etc. So these are really recent progress in ITOT study group 13. Let me show you the detailed information here. If you look at this slide, you can clearly know what kind of a document have been developed so far. Currently, here, overview document, functional requirements, and then recently we approved, but not yet finally published. Still, we editing something, but 3 documents, Y.3802, functional architecture, Y.3803, key management, Y.3804, control management. Those 3 documents will be published soon. And then we have several documents such as software-defined networking related solutions for QKDN, and the business model, and a couple of QoS related documents in question 6 also. Particularly QoS point of view, ITOT study group 12, they are developing the data specifications of QoS. However, in the study group 13 point of view, currently some networking point of view, there are 2 documents. One is general aspect of QoS, and the second one is requirement for QoS assurance. As far as I know, recently there are also some demand to develop certain solutions to use AI techniques for supporting quality of service. Quite similarly, there is another group I already mentioned, study group 17 for security methods. They also developed several documents. Some documents already approved. This year, a couple of documents also tried to consent. So then there are lots of relevant activities currently ITOT. two important groups, cation 16 of study group 13 and the cation 4 of study group 17. These two groups are very tightly collaborating together to develop all QKDN related documents. Furthermore, there is another group. Actually, last year, we successfully created a new focus group. The focus group name is Quantum Information Technology for Networks. So focus group QIT4N, this group is developing many preliminary standards which are related to other more futuristic ideas instead of current solutions. So that's the reason why currently they are mentioning slightly different keywords such as QIT, Quantum Information Technology. I believe eventually they also can consider various kind of other solutions such as quantum computing and various kind of analytic solutions also. Of course, this group is also developing quantum key distribution networks as an advanced version of QKDN networks, which we already developed in study groups. So this is just a picture to show what kind of topics they have currently considered. So as you can see here, mainly targeting various kind of solutions, but more specific solutions for quantum, including quantum computing, including quantum synchronizations, etc. And then they also consider various kind of evolutionary approach, including applications. So basically, this group, focus group QIT4N, they have considered various kind of enhancement and improvement and on new technical solutions. So I believe there are also other groups such as CSA, QSS. This one is a Cloud Security Alliance. There is also a relevant group regarding quantum safe security. And IEEE also, they are developing certain solutions for software-defined quantum communication. And the United States, NIST, National Institute for Standard and Technology, they are also developing relevant standards as a national standard related to quantum. Finally, I would like to wrap up my talks. So in the future, I believe we have various kind of additional works on QKDN. We plan to continue various kind of relevant topics which are related to QKDN, including software-defined networking, and in some case, more advanced versions such as machine learning in QKDN. And in some case, we also wanted to develop more updated version of QKDN. Actually, in here, I would like to emphasize one important thing: quantum enhanced networks. It's not only for QKD, but this one is targeting advanced technology of quantum networks. So I believe from next year, in the new study period, for 4 years, these kind of technologies will be very challenging area. So in this regard, cation 16, this group already changed the title, Quantum Enhanced Networks, and then we plan to develop several core documents on QKDN, and then for quantum enhanced networks and the services, we already identified various kind of solutions like here. Finally, I would like to conclude this talk. Quantum key distribution network, this one, support secure communications and the add-on security services. This is really important. Interconnecting to the user networks like 4G and 5G. As I just mentioned, content-enhanced networks and services might be very challenging area for the future. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You can close your screen so that we'll be able to be back on video. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for your talk. You presented the overall trend of international standardization on the quantum key distribution networks, and you also reviewed the recommendations developed by I2T Study Group 13. You also introduced the standardization categories and this status of major standards documents in progress in major standardization organization. So this has been a very useful presentation from you. You have also introduced new standardization items related to quantum enhanced networks, which is in the focus group of I2T study period starting from next year. So thank you very much for your presentation. We will now move on to the second keynote address. This is by Mr. Satish Jamadagni. It will be on the issue of security gaps in 5G. If I may introduce Mr. Satish Jamadagni, he has 20 years of industry experience in telecom domain. He is Vice President and Head of Standards in Reliance Jio. He serves as Vice Chair of TSDSI and Chair of TSDSI SG Networks, former Co-Chair of Asia Regional Operators Group, Small Cell Forum, previously on the board of the International Multimedia Teleconferencing Consortium, IMTC, and he has over 120 granted patents in the wireless domain. So welcome, Mr. Jamadagni. Please make your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Srivastava. I will present my screen now. Can you see my screen, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll start with the session on security in 5G, and this is one of the most important topics in the area of 5G deployment today, because whether we like it or not, things have gotten a bit hot on the 5G front because of certain geopolitics. So this is something that has to be accounted for. So this only widens or increases the security threat scenario as far as 5G networks are concerned. So that is something that has to be addressed in the multiple standardization bodies and outside. So just to start with a perspective, there has been increased attack space on telcos, and I would like to highlight a recent report from CyberSun. So it clearly states that there are multiple entities which are involved, which have an interest in getting into a telco network. It can be individuals, groups driven by multiple objectives. So it's very important to have a perspective of security, especially when it comes to 5G networks. This is just to give you a list of, I don't want to scare you with words like cyber warfare and all those stuff, but you can readily understand that scenarios are heading in that direction. So what are the typical types of attacks that we see in telco network? It's typically location tracking of individuals, high asset individuals. It can also be eavesdropping, simple SMS interception. SMS interception is primarily for any of the finance related attacks. Then you have fraud, you have a denial of service, you also have credential theft, data session hijacking, unblocking stolen phones, and that's one of the least significance of the crime listed here, I guess. But I think there is one significant threat which is emerging, which is the ability for these multiple entities to bring down the entire network, especially when such network assets are seen as national assets. And this is a significant development, which is a significant recent development, I would say, and that is something that has to be taken into account. Before we get into the 5G scenario, we just look at the traditional telco, that means the non-5G network, till about LTE, till the 4th generation networks. Typically, the attacks used to be coming from one of the interfaces to the outside world. And these would typically be your SS7 gateway or your SIG-TRAN gateway or your diameter protocol, because these are all entities where these are all the protocols from where you enter a network, and typically from a roaming scenario. I mean, that's what it is. And with the introduction of IMS or VoLTE in LTE, the application server, what is called as AS, also became a point of attack source. So this has been approximately the scenario from a 4G perspective till 4G networks. So the point of entry till about 4G networks is restricted. There are only 2 or 3 places from where you can come in. You can either come in from the device side, which is reducing over a period of time. So attacks from the device side has been reducing over a period of time. But the attacks from the other side, which is the SS7 or the diameter protocol side, which is primarily the interface to the outside world, the rest of the networks for roaming scenarios, that has been increasing. But at least in the LTE case, you know precisely the entry points for attackers. And there are ways of mitigating it. Now, for example, when we talk about SS7, there are SS7 gateways. GSMA has been working on scenarios to mitigate all the known threat scenarios. So there is a lot of work done in the direction. So it is fairly mature. And there are ways in which one can also handle the scenarios. But when we come to 5G, the scenario changes completely. Why? Because the attack surface increases, and as per this report here, it says 200 times. 5G has 200 times more access point for hackers than existing networks. I mean, that is what this article says. And we will see why that is the case. But primarily, it comes from 2 areas. One is IoT. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and you can also see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So primarily the so-called enhancement in the threat surface is coming from 2 significant areas. One is IoT, Internet of Things, because the variety of devices which are going to come into the network. And we will see later on that the security protocols for IoT is somewhat compromised, primarily because it is a small device and the footprint, the software footprint is fairly small, and one will have to make some compromises in that direction. The other one is the cloudification of the entire network. So more we talk about cloudification, more is the attack surface, because as we spoke in the 4G network, you had specific points from where typically attacks would arise from. But whereas in the case of 5G, it can be anywhere in the network. So for example, if your RAM network is cloudified, the vulnerabilities of the software that you have used for your cloudification, if you've used a version of Linux, say for example, as the base on the hardware, now any vulnerability in that software becomes a vulnerability for the entire network. So that is precisely where one would have to agree that the 5G provides a huge surface for attackers. In the case of cloud, what typically happens is there are multiple surface attacks. For example, the OAuth protocol, or the authentication service protocol, is one of the protocols which has been used as an attack surface in the recent past. I mean, there are multiple examples of using the authentication services as one of the methods to get into the cloud. But it all comes down to simple software. For example, when we talk about you have virtualization layer, the virtualization software could have vulnerabilities. You have Linux or any other operating system vulnerabilities. You also have application interfaces that opens up a whole set of surface for attackers. So this is a typical example of how people or attackers get into a cloud. And one has to understand that the entire 5G core network is going to be cloud-based, or everything is going towards the cloud. So obviously, everything that is applicable to a cloud scenario is also applicable now to the 5G network scenario. What about IoT? IoT, yes, it's a serious threat surface because of multiple reasons. Yeah, the nature of the network, nature of the devices, the plethora of devices that one will come across, all the way from your Android devices to simple non-IP data devices. So very recently, we've been seeing a number of attacks, especially the ransomware attacks. And there's one example provided here. There's one example of a company which went bust because they were subject to an attack. And after they paid out the money, they didn't have anything else to run the company on. So they had to shut shop. This is just an example. But vast majority of these kind of attacks also go unnoticed because the companies involved, for sake of continuity of business, they may not necessarily report it. They simply pay up and get on with the business. But then again, that's a huge loss. So IoT is one serious threat surface emerging in the 5G and beyond network scenario that will have to be addressed very carefully in all the standardization bodies. Smart city is another example. When we talk about smart cities, you simply have to talk about the number of interfaces which are there. There will typically be multiple cloud entities. These may not necessarily be all owned by the government. They may be private entities. They may be private cloud, public cloud. They may be government-owned cloud entities. Then again, there is also a host of devices and sensors which come into picture. And the sheer number of interfaces or the data interchange, exchange surface that you see in this diagram, anything can become a point of attack, from the devices to the cloud to anything in between. So IoT, specifically from a smart city perspective, is a serious affair, primarily because it affects the functioning of a society, and that typically constitutes to cyber warfare. And if somebody were to get into a smart city and turn off everything, that's a serious thing one will have to account for. I will take you through a quick introduction of the notion of security in 5G NR, and then we can summarize. So 5G specifications were formalized in 2017 and 18. At least the first versions of them were released in 2018. One of the, we will have to look at securities from what is called as non-standalone option of deployment of 5G, and also the standalone deployment of option of 5G. The non-standalone works closely with the 4G network, and one will have to look at it from the LTE security perspective, whereas a standalone 5G network is totally standalone. It's just 5G, so that's easier to look at. In the case of non-standalone, much of the security emphasis is on the LTE network, primarily because the signaling is anchored on the LTE network. So the 5G network is only acting as a data plane, but that does not necessarily mean that there will be no attacks on the data plane or the interfaces through which a 5G network will interface with the LTE network. But predominantly, at least the way it is in the specifications today, the emphasis or the onus of security lies on the 4G network in the case of non-standalone architecture. In the case of standalone architecture, the UE or the device perspective more or less remains the same the way it was in earlier generations of communication technology, but but from a network side, quite a few things have changed. So there are two scenarios that I would like to show you. The trust model in 5G in the case of non-roaming scenario and in the case of roaming scenario. So the trust model, there are trust models all the way through. If you look at the diagram on the left, you have the device. The device consists of a USIM and the ME, and there is a trust model between the network and the UE. That is the first trust model. And then you have, when I say trust model, the trust model extends from the radio access network to the non-access stratum. That means the core network and the access network. So there is a trust model between the access network and the device and the non-access stratum and the device. That means the core network and the device. So the entire gamut of trust relations are established. And the AMF, which is the mobility management function, in LTE it used to be called as MME, mobility management function. So that is the core network. So your core network primarily starts with the AMF. So the trust relation goes in a hierarchical fashion. And in the case of roaming scenario, you also have the other entity for which the trust relation is primarily established through the SCFP entity. So there is something called a security anchor function, SEAF. And in the case of roaming function, you have peer entities of SEAFs which will talk to each other, and then subsequently there is trust established with the roaming network. This is approximately the overall philosophy of the security trust model in 5G. So the whole question is, this is all fine. I mean, if it is all within the domain of a telco. When I talk about domain of a telco, if it is in the physical domain of a telco, in the sense that if this is physically isolated, then it's perfectly fine. But every single of these boxes can be seen as an IP box going forward. And every single one of these boxes is a virtualized box and is cloudified. In a sense, the AMF function is nothing but a software which is running on one of the cloud virtual functions. And that is where things start getting complex. So in the case of standalone, as per the diagram, this is just an explanation of the diagram. So you have these different entities. You have the authentication function, which is the key anchor, which has the core key. And in case you have the non-trusted or non-3GPP access networks, which are connected to the 5G core, the same set of keys are used. I'm talking about Wi-Fi or any other technology that there may be, and you also have the authentication credential repository which keeps all your keys. There is between the UE and the network, you need to have the same set of keys. I mean, this entity makes sure that you have the same set of keys on either side. I don't want to get into the rest of the stuff because they're all different boxes which play out some function. So essentially, the philosophy of trust in 5G is to make sure that every single entity is mutually authenticated, and then any subsequent authentication mechanism is built on top. So you have something called as a primary authentication between any entities in a 5G network. You have secondary authentication. You can add more keys, certificate mechanisms between any entity as you see fit. For example, IPsec. There are a lot of interfaces where you can introduce IPsec, but then again, it's a very expensive affair, both in terms of compute and cost of deployment. So not many people do that. So that's a choice. That's a choice for the operator. One will also have to talk about interoperator security, but one of the biggest mechanisms that will have to be looked at is the service-based architecture. In the case of service-based architecture, you're technically talking about cloud architecture, and that's where one will have to really think about different mechanisms of securing a telco network. So when it comes to 5G IoT, especially when we talk about CAT-M or narrowband IoT, security is very critical here, because you have at one part you have the device security. A device in the sense you have a modem related security. The modem security is assured from a 3GPP specification perspective. But then the applications that sit on your device, that is a whole different ballgame altogether. Just to give you one example of the notion of security, apart from whatever typical security that exists because of your USIM, the SIM card on your device, and the credentials it carries. In IoT, there is also something called as data over NAS. This is just an example. There are a lot of such deployment scenarios, scenario options available. So when you send data on the control plane, essentially, so the control plane is always expected to be more secure than the data plane. So when you send small amounts of data, in this case, it is typically assumed to be non-IP data, because these are all sensor data. You don't know how it comes from. It can simply be analog data which is coming from a sensor, or any other forms of data which might be there. It might even be a simple picture which is taken of a reading from the electricity meter. So you send the data on the control plane. It is assumed that anything that goes on the control plane is much more secure than what goes on the data plane. So this is one simple mechanism in which security is addressed as far as IoT is concerned. But if you look at the device on the left side in the diagram here, IoT device, most of these devices are Android devices. So one will also have to consider any aspects related to Android security into the scheme of things when we consider IoT. There is something called as ultra reliable low latency communication, and this is expected to host a whole bunch of verticals like industrial IoT. So when we talk about ultra reliability, typically in a 3GPP network, what happens is you have redundant sessions. In a sense, you send data multiple times to make sure that it has reliably reached the peer entity. So whenever you send data multiple times, when you repeatedly send data multiple times, that multiple data paths themselves become a security threat surface that has to be addressed. So there are multiple aspects to URLLC security, but this is only one single aspect. So there are ways of securing the path, multi-data path for URLLC, and that has been the key focus area for the 3GPP SA3 working group. I'm summarizing. Sorry for the time. There is one thing that has to be also accounted for in the grand scheme of things from a telco perspective, which is the hardware supply chain, because there has been, there is one example, I'm just quoting one example, there are multiple other scenarios which becomes hard to state here. One example which is known in the public domain is that the hardware was inserted with a spy chip which was controlling the baseboard management controller. It was built along with the baseboard management controller. So when you start having issues in the hardware itself, then things get tricky. So securing supply chain also is part of the security consideration that one will have to take into account. So with that, I wind my talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Jamadagni. You have covered existing security mechanism for 5G and 3G from 3GPP perspective. And you have also explained about the issues that will have to be considered over and above what is available as specifications. Issues related to cloud security in a cloudified RAN and core network has been discussed. Thank you very much for your presentation. I call upon the third keynote speaker today, Mr. Sharad Arora. Mr. Arora will talk about National Trust Center and Security by Design. He is the founder and managing director of Sensorise. He is also a member of TSDSI Governing Council and vice chair of the Study Group Services and Solutions. Sharad has 30 years of experience in telecom security, IoT, M2M, smart cities domain. His contribution has positively enabled the development of several ecosystems, including mobility, wallets, SIM, IoT, M2M, digital certificate, and security domains. Sharad has won many national and international awards, the latest being the ET Telecom 2020 Best IoT Service Provider and the 2019 Stevie Bronze for Telecom Product Innovation. He has contributed to more than a dozen technical publications and standards for TEC, TSDSI, BIS, and ITU. He holds a US patent for controlling the usage of a subscription in a mobile device comprising a plurality of subscriptions based on available quota, validity, and coverage. So welcome, Mr. Sharad, for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Srivastava, and thank you, Mr. Lee, and thank you, Satish, for getting me started. I think I have to catch up about 5 odd or 10 odd minutes, and I will try to benefit from all the background that's been said, one by Satish. Before I bring up the presentation, I thought I'd just quickly say that I'll use the benefit of Dr. Lee having explained what is about to arrive with quantum computing, and mention that with quantum computing, the task of breaking down security is going to become much easier than what it was. In fact, much of the public key infrastructure that is currently using public keys is going to be suspect in 5 years from now, if not earlier. And then Satish has described at great length how the threat vectors, the threat surfaces have increased. So I'm going to get into my presentation a bit quicker and, as I said, leverage these initial thoughts. And but I have such an interesting subject to talk about, and it's very nice that Mr. Srivastava is here as chair of this session, because he has been one of the architects of what is required for National Trust Center and Security by Design. So in a way of saying what Satish has been talking in terms of the security threats, I'm going to try to put together some kind of a model for people to discuss in terms of how to avoid those pitfalls. So in this 20 minutes, I'm going to try and cover very quickly the fantastic work that's been done in the telecom ecosystem with the Honorable TRAI, with the Department of Telecommunications, with TEC, and with TSDSI. I'm going to propose some concepts of trust and framework of trust and the pillars of security and bootstrapping, so that the rest of the session can be properly consumed, understood. I'm also going to propose a service provider enabled approach for this important subject of security by design, and try to discuss with you the feasibility of such a security model, which can operate at scale, a national scale security model, and especially address IoT and connected devices, and put in front of you what can be called a mechanism or a model for certification and registration, such as to have service providers, devices, and applications all behave in a trustful manner. Trustful manner is something we will describe as we move along. And then also bring in the 1M2M compliant framework. Not going to bring anything 1M2M into this discussion as such, but the establishment of a National Trust Center and App Registry, how that can benefit from the steps that have been taken in the Indian ecosystem of standardization and policy making. So with that, I'm just going to show you this little summary of how the proactive Indian standards and policies have shaped this ecosystem from April 2015, when the National M2M Roadmap was announced, a very high capability document. And since then, a host of technical reports, maybe a dozen with TEC, registration guidelines for M2M, Honorable TRAI's guidelines for M2M, which were under the chairmanship of Mr. Srivastava. He was then anchoring that position. The amendments in the Telecom Act for device certification, and so on and so forth. The important few things, the red marked works that have been done with ITU, the Indian ITU contribution on digital ID for automotive, which is now a supplement 53 of ITUT, and also the ongoing contribution to SG13, of which Dr. Lee is the chair, on the open bootstrapping framework. So a lot of work in the standards and policy making is afoot. A lot is happening. A lot of concern, a lot of consideration is in the making. In a very quick summary, if you want to decode what the regulatory standards and policy views were saying, TRAI recommended on M2M to say service providers have to be registered to start a point of trustful acknowledgement. Device manufacturers have to implement the security by design principle, and that a national trust center should be set up to record or register the certification of M2M devices and applications. The TEC launched a long 18-month study on M2M security, which had some conclusions in terms of a functional security architecture, security threats and mitigation. National Trust Center was also a very important conclusion of that technical report. The Telecom Act notification, which made the testing for all connected devices mandatory, essentially put the responsibility on the network and on the device manufacturer squarely to say that no certified device can be connected on a licensed network. So already a lot of the efforts have been made. Stepping back a little, I think we already heard a lot of mentions of volume, scale, and the arriving new technologies. The more we get connected, the more we get exposed. The more devices that run our lives, from meters to parking to traffic management, the more of these connected devices, the more is the enhancement in the threat surface over which we could face challenges. And as many of you know, that actionable intelligence, AI, a lot of time, effort, energy is now being spent on keeping AI ethical, which is to ensure that you are not compromised by that very effort which was aiming to help you with more actionable intelligence, and so on and so forth. So all of these, in my view, just come under one simple word that is often used, called the IoT use cases. Basically machines that are getting connected and that data being utilized for a whole host of alternate purposes. 5G is more vulnerable to cybersecurity threats? Yes, of course it is. The reasons are very simple. 5G architecture is pushing. I remember the time when I set up a billing system in the year of 1996. We were searching for a place that nobody knew. We were searching for a nondescript place. That is how switches were set up. You looked for a place that nobody would come to, and one of the ways of keeping things secure was just not knowing about the fact that in this building there is a switch, or in this building there's a billing system. That used to be a methodology then. Now we are talking about putting core network elements in a cloud. So I don't think it needs to be explained that physical security that one enjoyed with the core networks is trying to go away now. And of course, the amount of data, the number of devices, go back 20 years, the network had simple brick phones. It had very well specified functions. It could do only a few things. Now, there are a million applications that run off the phone. It uses the phone and the network in so many different ways. So without getting further, we just need to know that we need a lot more trust. And when it comes to IoT, we are looking at IoT solutions and services that are exposing threat services that, when summed up together, actually go beyond the threat surfaces that were visible in IT and go beyond the threat surfaces that were visible for the mobile. So the sum together of IT and mobile threats now become the IoT threat surfaces, but the fundamental need still remains the same, that we need to care for the 4 pillars of security, which is confidentiality, nobody is listening to your conversation; integrity, nobody is changing the data that you are sending; authentication, nobody is telling someone else that you are he or he is you, which is identity is maintained; and of course non-repudiation, which is the device that sent the data or the mobile that sent the data or the person that entered the transaction is able to prove or disprove that he did or did not enter that transaction. So the 4 pillars of security don't change. It's just that the number of threat surfaces change a lot. Here you can see a whole host of new threat surfaces and also the sort of assets that are subject to victimization. So what are the components of trust enablement? I'm picking this up from the TEC M2M security report, which basically classified in 3 components: the device security, which is how do we identify what type of a device needs what type of security. Not every sensor, not a weather station sensor, not every sensor has the same type of use case and with the same type of severity in its compromise. So one of the recommendations at the TCM2M security report was to look at a 5-layer security architecture, and then on that put 5 different layers of security, going from no ID all the way to personalization and biometrics, as you can see on the top here. So there was a need for a root of trust, because if you don't identify, if you cannot uniquely, and if you can, as you saw, without a faked identity, if you cannot identify a device, then you don't know how to treat it. You don't know what class it belongs to. Beyond that, you need a trust framework of which is keys and certificates. You need trusted service providers. So if you look back on a few slides, the Honorable TRAI had recommended that register M2M service providers. Why? Because just the process of registration brings a strong element of trust into the overall process. Then authenticated devices and certified applications. It is as simple as this, that if you have a trust framework that works like this, it will serve the purpose. And then on top of that, the report suggested that use cases be classified and compliance be treated in these many different ways, which is a critical quality of service use case to a non-critical best effort use case. You could classify use cases to identify different type of requirements. So unique global tamper-resistant identity as a root of trust. Certification, digital trust, registration, and compliance are what the country needs, not just this country, but any other country, what they need to bring along a first step in that direction. One of the things that we are trying to do and look at here is the GSMA EUICC is one such secure element, and it has a host of other features. So very quickly here, an EUICC actually has the whole concept of secure by design, because it has secure elements, it can be FIPS certified, it is GSMA certified, it can act as a root of trust. Beyond that, it offers a quality of service, which is a very important aspect for mission critical IoT use cases. If you are not connected, all your security management, etc., can get compromised. Similar to that, it is actually required for IoT that you are ready for manufacturing, you are factory ready, you are industry ready, and these elements of requirements are fully satisfied by the GSMA EUICC, and as a result, GSMA eSIM evolution is called the game changer for IoT. You can see that the elements of the fact that it can be soldered into devices, it is of various form factors, it is remote programmable, it can have multiple subscription slots, and most importantly, it belongs to the manufacturer. What the DOT notification on the eSIM said, which is basically to acknowledge that it is a piece of integrated circuit that is now bought by the manufacturers, and the telco SIM umbilical is broken. And I think that is also where to start with if possible security breach is caused. I'm not going to stay too long. I would have liked to, but short of time now, but rely upon what Satish said earlier, that in moving from 4G to 5G, some additional security nodes have been added, which provide that additional required security, because the 3GPP access and the non-3GPP access are both supported. I'll put it simply. The GSM network, as most of you would know it, I'm talking to the audience, and those networks which are going to be outside of the GSM networks, both networks can benefit from the security. The EAP mechanism with the EAP AKA and the 5G AKA are both available. And in terms of how that is exposed, basically the SIM does end up acting as the root of trust. And as a root of trust, I'll quickly show this. This is really important, that the Universal Integrated Circuit card is the heart of billions of GSM and banking cards. It's proven itself as a secure element. It's proven itself as a secure application platform. It is also very important to state that it has a globally unique identity, which is a very important requirement for security. And also it works, as we just saw, for GSM and non-GSM. And this has been the subject of TEC's Y.OBF Trust Open Bootstrap Framework recommendation. So when you look at this globally unique EUICC EID and link it to the device and link it to the custodian's digital identity, you create a foundation for end-to-end security. 3 digital identities create a foundation for end-to-end security with the EUICC acting as a root of trust. You apply this to the practical case of the country here, and then you have Aadhaar, which is a unique citizen identity, and then you have, for example, device certification with MTCTE, and you get an identity with the National Trust Center. You put this together with a service provider trust framework in which the custodian KYC, device authentication, and the app certification come together, and what you get is a machine KYC. You've heard of KYC. Each one of you has a bank account or a telephone, you get your KYC done. Here we are talking about the concept of a machine KYC in which, other than the custodian verification, the machine is authenticated too. Use of a globally unique EUICC EID with service provider machine KYC then creates a digital infrastructure for compliance of security by design principles. And this is where we come to face with the subject here, that this is the concept of an operator trust. This is the concept in which a scalable model can be provided, in which the operator trust offers multiple other applications in distributed ecosystems the ability to provide the same level of security as you today get inside a GSM network. And this is also the basic hypothesis with the Y.OBF submission, that Y.OBF, it provides a cryptographic process of binding the user's identity to the keying material provisioned in the secure element of the user's device, enabling the device to communicate securely with trusted services. And if you see that now, we just take a pause, look back on the 5-7 slides at the back, and we have said that with a root of trust, with the root of trust bound to a service provider KYC, you are actually able to get the possibility of an infrastructure that can withstand all the requirements of security by design. And then on top of that, if you impose or look at this blueprint where what the Honorable TRAI said, which is to register the M2M service provider, what 1M2M is saying about National App Registry, register the M2M service provider, register the application, provide a basis for connected devices to be identified using secure element, which could be UICC or a device-based secure element, and you put it all together, you get the basic fundamental working process which can operate at scale, which is, it doesn't matter what type of IoT device, and it doesn't matter what type of application, the identity of the device, the identity of the service provider, the identity of the application are all linked, and as a result have a digital signature or a digital footprint that can be verified. Very quickly now, this can actually provide a global interoperable trust framework. And it is in here that we also have the benefit. India is one of those few countries, hand-counted countries, that has a digital act and its own root certification authority. The root certification authority can actually generate certificates for M2M, IoT, and there is no restriction. And certificates and keys, as was said in Dr. Lee's presentation, and also Mr. Srivastava mentioned that keys are very important, certificates are very important. They are the digital enablers of trust. So you get an infrastructure in which all IoT devices can be uniquely identified, encryption, decryption can be practiced at very, very low costs, and an entire national infrastructure that can work with multiple repositories. That for transport, MOT stands for Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. So vehicles in India that are getting connected with the eSIM. The eSIM is the root of trust, and the Vahan, which is the repository of all vehicles in India, is using that root of trust as an identifier, digital identifier. And this can spread into health devices, this can spread into agriculture devices, and then you have a digital footprint. So that is a quick summary, putting it all together, that there is very clearly the possibility that the secure element, which was earlier used only for connectivity, which, for example, in 5G, is also going to be used for non-3GPP network security. It's also called in the ETSI term, and Dr. Scraze is on this call, which is the generic bootstrapping architecture. A secure element can provide the required identity, authentication. A national trust center, which is already a requirement of the Act, can provide the registration. And with the service provider registration, you can get a certified service provider app and device ecosystem, which is the purpose. 1M2M transport standards by TSDSI and adopted by TEC as national standards provide the required specifications and processes for sustainable deployment of the National Trust Center framework for IoT. That is a quick summary, and thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sharad. You have introduced the concept of trust framework, the 4 pillars of security and bootstrapping. You've also discussed the service provider enabled approach for security by design, and examine the techno-commercial feasibility of a proposed security model that can address a wide range of IoT connected devices. And lastly, you have discussed the need for certification and registration of service providers, devices, and applications. It proposes a 1M2M compliant framework for the establishment of a national trust center. Thank you very much. There are a couple of questions in the questions section, but I think we will take it during the course of panel discussion. With this, we are closing the keynote addresses. I request the host to kindly take us to the different session. Thank you very much.